when it sends its action potential down, that spreads out along all these branches and contracts all those muscle fibers. In the last lecture, we saw that you can increase the force of contraction by not giving the muscle any time to relax in between stimuli. If you increase the frequency of stimulation, you get a stronger contraction on top of that. So today we're going to see that the bigger the motor unit is, the stronger the contraction, the red one compared to the purple one here. And if you stimulate both at the same time, of course, you're going to get a stronger contraction. But going back to last lecture, that frequency of stimulation is going to, increase the total force or tension, right, for any single muscle fiber or any single motor unit, right? Because that single muscle fiber is going to be doing the same thing with a whole bunch of muscle fibers, depending on the size of the motor unit, right? So the total tension, a whole muscle, the entire muscle we're talking about now is going to be able to produce, that is, create a force, pull something, is going to depend on the number of muscle fibers that are contracting in units, right? And so if we had a large motor unit, you're going to get a stronger contraction than if you had a smaller motor unit, right? This brings us into the significance of a particular size of a motor unit, right? Because all these muscle fibers of the motor unit are contracting and relaxing together. Right? You're going to have that total strength of a contraction depending on the size of the motor units. So over here, right, we have the muscles of your eye. Remember these rectus superior and inferior, right, that we're moving. Your eye moves very fast, right? Your voice box moves. Your muscles of your voice box have to be very finely controlled, right? Your hand movements, you could think of somebody like playing the piano really fast, like doing all these hand movements. All those aren't lifting a lot of weights or anything like that, right? Very fine movements, but they have to be done very precisely. So when you have something that needs a lot of precise control, you are going to have many small motor units, right? So basically this motor neuron is micromanaging this whole muscle right here, right? Having very fine control over it, because you need that fine movement. You don't want big clunky movements, right? You want very fine control. And we're going to see this later, right? When we get into the brain, we're going to talk about the neural map of your body, right, in your brain. And we're going to see like the area for your eye muscles are going to be way overrepresented versus the muscles of your back, let's say, because there's a whole lot more neurons controlling this small muscle than there in this big muscles, like your erecti spinae muscles, these postural muscles, like your quads, your hamstrings, your gastrocnemius. Right? Those don't need very fine control. This is like, here's a signal, just go, just contract. Right? It's going to contract, and when one motor neuron contracts, you're going to get a pretty big contraction in that. If you have one motor neuron, in this case, this could be 1,000, it could be 2,000, it could be 3,000. One single action potential is going to travel down and stimulate, 1,000 muscle fibers at once, right? And they're all going to kind of contract at once. That's going to cause a much more powerful contraction. So the size of the motor unit is going to have that effect. We'll also see later that there, this motor neuron that's controlling small ones are actually small motor neurons, and these are actually big. Their cell bodies are big. We probably won't get to that till we get to the nervous system, though. So that is the motor unit and the size of the control. So, different motor units are controlling would be like an entire fascicle or something. And in this sample right here, the motor units, right? Not all three, the purple, the blue, and the red one, are going to be contracting at any given one time, unless you were doing some heavy lifting right there, right? So these are going to go around, and maybe the purple one goes if we need a little more strength, right? Maybe the blue one gets activated. If we need a little more strength, we have the red one contracting along with it, right? So basically, you can recruit more motor neurons to create more strength right there. And so the whole fascicle, and this is going to be repeated in all the fascicles of your muscle, that they're going to be contracted, or you can control the amount of force by how many motor units are going to be contracted at any given point. Within this whole muscle here, let's say you had 10 motor neurons controlling it, and you wanted to keep a certain level of tenseness in your muscle. You didn't want to be completely flaccid. So you want a little bit of contraction. And in that case, you just do one of these at a time, right? So you'd have the red one go, right? Fiber, and all those fibers would go off at one time. As soon as this one red one shot off the three, it's three targets, it's three fibers. So if this was 1,000, 1,000 would go, and you get a certain amount of contraction. This one was pretty weak because it was only 3. That was one at a time, and you generated a fraction of the force that you can generate. If you want to generate a little bit more, you could do more impulses per second, right? This frequency of stimulation. You do it more, and the muscles are going to contract more and more. You get that unfused, you get that summation, the unfused tetanus, the tetanus. And what you also can do is do more than one at once, right? Let's say you're picking up your cat, right? You bend down, you pick them up. That's going to cause a little bit of muscle contraction, right? Pretty light load. If you're going to deadlift, your body weight, right? You start from the bottom right there, you start lifting, then all of a sudden you got to generate more and more force, right? The farther up you move that weight, right? So you're going to continuously call on more and more motor units to contract harder and harder, right? So the more motor units that are contracting at one more time, these are going to all go at once now, right? So that's twice as strong a contraction, or whatever proportion, as one at a time. Create more force, you recruit more motor neurons. Right? So when you do this, you could do, if you wanted to, nature could have it that all 3 of these contract at once, right? For a brief second, you get a little bit of contraction. But what it does is this one contracts, this one gets stimulated, this one gets stimulated, and then this one gets stimulated, right? So that there's an even more even distribution, right? This allows for a much smoother contraction, both when you're contracting to recruitment and motor unit size, and that tying those together, right? Then we went back to the small motor unit, right? For fine motor actions like the eye right here, right? And we said motor unit contain really like 3 to 5 to 10 muscle fibers, right? Your hand, your larynx, your things that require fine movement. And so the whole concept of this, right, was that if only one is activated, only a few fibers contract, the muscle response is going to be pretty small, right? And then you can recruit more ones, and there's going to be a small incremental smooth contraction, right, between those, because only a few of these muscle fibers are going to contract with each additional movement. And this is going to allow for fine gradations of movement. This is the motor unit size. Smaller ones every single one that generates, it's only going to be a little bit of a response. Then they're going to be going fast, right? So you can get a very fine sort of movement action out of that. Whereas these ones with big motor units, if we want gross motor action, we don't need, as well as postural muscles, as we'll see, where we have a large motor unit, one motor unit controlling many thousands of fibers maybe. When this one, you get one motor neuron activated, and you put a second one on, that's going to double it in a very large incremental force, right? So the response is going to jump with these correspondingly greater increments compared to these right here. So this brings us into another related concept right over here. And this is your muscle tone, which we will talk about in the next video. See you later.